only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 76 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. Over the years, I've been inspired by receiving messages through my guardian angel Titan, and latterly in the second series, Titan moved away and allowed me to pursue the ideas that were coming to me very strongly. Things that I picked up through dreams, things that I felt, things that I read about or saw, and I was interpreting that in the way that other things were coming to me, and somehow trying to see, was this a coincidence? Were all these things fitting together in some sort of grand puzzle? And then most recently, and probably starting towards the end of the last series, I was being really drawn towards interdimensionality, consciousness, the joining together somehow of UFOs or UAPs as they're now called, the visitors, if you like, from other dimensions that have been through all human history, but have come very, very much more in public consciousness because of the UAP hearings in the United States. This is no coincidence to me. There is a reason, I think, why Titan kind of primed me in my ability to understand the certain metaphysical aspects of existence to begin with, and introduced me to talking to dead people. And I still quite enjoy it when that happens. But he did very much encourage me to look at world events because something was going to happen. And you might remember there was an episode last year where it was actually quite frightening. It was as if something really big was about to happen. And many things did happen, not least, of course, the disclosure movement. And I talked about the new documentary that has just come out about that. And it shows how people such as myself who read about it, or all the people who I watch, are not crazies. Some might be misinformed. Some might have bad intentions and maybe lying about it and maybe trying to turn people away from the truth, but the majority of these whistleblowers have come out and are telling the truth. They're saying it the way they have experienced it, either as members of the military or pilots, civil or military, or people who've worked within the government, or in contractors who have reverse engineered highly sophisticated technology that was either gifted to us or had crashed and was retrieved by governments, and not just the American government. So all of that has been quite a fascinating deep dive. And most recently I moved into consciousness because it seems that consciousness is how we communicate with these entities, as well as it being a fundamental to our existence as human beings, because it can explain how we function as humans, but maybe how being conscious isn't just human, it's also extra human. And we are only conscious in our body as humans now, but when we leave our bodies and die, we become part again of this huge supreme consciousness. And that is all very, very similar to what was being revealed to me in early episodes about life after death. So it all joins together with the whole theme of my podcast, which is talking to the dead. Now, this week, I'm going to do something quite unusual because I've come across something on the internet which I read at first and thought, I wonder. But it's had such an effect on me this week, and I've had so many thoughts and dreams about it that I've decided to read the whole thing in this episode because I want you guys to listen to this and think about it and wonder what you think the truth could be. It does seem to resonate to me. It's got some similarities to the Lacerta files that I talked about earlier in the year. And it is also very, very pertinent because it's about the disclosure movement, and the person who's talking is allegedly a very senior person who is whistleblowing about what's really going on in terms of UAPs, governments, and human consciousness, and the origins of the human species as we know it. So I'm going to read the document. It's quite long. I hope you'll enjoy the way I read it. And then afterwards, I want to tell you some other thoughts that came through, showing you the similarities, I think, between this document and ancient texts, notably the Book of Enoch, which I have mentioned before, but I want to talk about that because I felt that I had to. It was very important that this was a document that I read again and started talking to in this podcast. So here we go with this document. And I must repeat again that I can't attribute this document to anyone. So in that respect, I think it's fair use. I don't think I'm breaking any copyright because nobody knows who this belongs to. So I will read it and let you make up your own mind. You wanted disclosure. I'm a whistleblower. And I'm recently retired from the inside. And you're only getting part of the truth. Hi, so I heard you all want disclosure. All right, hope you have the time. Because there's a lot. Grab a coffee, or maybe get comfy with a pillow somewhere. I've been watching the news and hearing a lot of things I know to be true, shocking stuff. And it's being talked openly by some higher-ups in this documentary. So I figured, what the hell? You can call me Rhea. Not my real name, obviously, but it'll do. A little about me. I spent about 8 years in the military to pay for college and another decade plus in a part of the US intelligence component that does not officially exist. On paper, I worked for a boring-sounding office in a department most people have never heard of. In reality, it was a compartment inside a compartment where the odd stuff of a certain nature got rooted. My actual speciality is electro-optics, lasers, sensors, EO imaging systems, the math and hardware behind how we detect things at a distance, and in some cases, put energy on them. That is what I was trained in, what I did most of my serious work on, once I was off the deployment treadmill. So, when I say I know something about directed energy weapons and weird sensor returns, that's not I heard this from a friend of a friend. That was my day job. And most of my career was boring in the way dangerous jobs are boring. Long days in windowless rooms, Iraq, Afghanistan in the early years, doing the usual mix of SIG-int and HUM-int support. Phone records, pattern of life workups, building target packets on people who'd never know my name, but might notice a drone overhead later. After I got out of uniform, I slid over to contractor work and got pulled into the permanent government side. For a long time, my world was very normal. Counter-terrorism, sanctions evasion, shady cargo going through weird ports, stuff like that. After that, foreign missile tests and what you have probably seen described publicly as space domain awareness. Basically watching dots move around the sky and trying to decide whose dots they were and what they were doing. The weird part started when I was detailed to a small interagency working group looking at what was called anomalous aerospace and undersea systems. Translation, things detected and showing up on sensors that did not match any node platform, did not behave like clutter, and didn't go away when you changed radar modes or swapped optical systems. I was there because I understood both sides of the equation, the physics of the sensors and the intelligence context. You get taught very quickly to treat anything unexplained as a glitch, a calibration issue, operator error, or software artifacts, anything that keeps your world tidy. You get used to hearing weird glitch as a catch-all. Except after a while, you notice that some of these glitches kept showing up and that they were across different systems or different countries or decades apart. Some behaviors, some basic locations, some signatures never quite fitted. And at some point you either admit that there is a real pattern or you drive yourself crazy trying not to see it. If you are useful and you start asking the wrong questions for long enough, someone eventually pulls you aside, takes you to a skiff, takes your phone, has you sign your life away again, and shows you the next layer of the onion. This onion goes so deep, I doubt that even after years of briefings, I've been exposed to anything below a few layers. Even still, most of this is purposely kept off NIPR and JWICS and is done in person. That is where I learned about most of what you're interested in here and what seems to be bubbling to the surface in the news lately. That's when I learned about what we call the Council. Yes, aliens. And I suspect you're not likely to see a lot of what I know mentioned, even by some who know it and have begun speaking out for reasons I'll get into later. I've never met them face to face. Everything I know about them is from briefings, documents, and one secure video session that I honestly wish I had skipped. But it lines up with too many independent data points to just shrug off as somebody's pet theory. The basic story is this. The planet Earth was noticed roughly 2 billion years ago, and long before anything walked around on land. Not because we're special, but because we tripped a sensor, or rather life tripped their sensors. You see, the Council is not a single species. It's a collective of several advanced interstellar, maybe even interdimensional civilizations that run long-term surveys of stars and planets the way we run spy satellites. Huge distributed arrays of instruments working together, watching thousands of star systems at once for millions of years at a time. Their gear probably makes the James Webb Telescope look like a kid's backyard telescope. About 2 billion years ago, these instruments picked up biosignatures here, chemical fingerprints in the atmosphere, that meant something was alive. Atmospheric composition like free oxygen and methane, spectral fingerprints, chemical disequilibria that scream, there's metabolism happening down there. You know the basics. At that point, Earth went into a database as interesting, revisit later. Standard procedure for them when a world looks promising, but it's pretty boring from their point of view. They then send automated probes. Not big crude ships like you would see in a sci-fi movie, just small, tough, very smart machines. Those probes come in, mostly target the oceans, and set up self-replicating facilities on the sea floor. Those facilities use local materials to build more facilities, more probes, craft that can operate underwater, in the air, in near space, and eventually avatars that can interact with whatever life evolves. These biological, or rather biomechanical avatars are what some people who claim to have been abducted have likely experienced. Although they do have what we would call ASI. These beings are not gods, they are technology, and they aren't perfect. They make mistakes, they glitch out, etc. But the reason they base all of that underwater is for a simple reason. The bottom of an ocean does not care about ice ages, political empires, climate swings, wars, and temperatures and pressures change slowly over what are long periods of time. It's a fairly stable environment, and for much of human history has been mostly inaccessible. Speaking of time, we Earth humans tend to think in terms of nothing longer than the current human lifespan. And when pondering non-human intelligence, we like to think in terms of deep space, distance and light years, but we seldom consider the lifespan and concept of time for a post-biological species that could be quite different from ours. Only our most astute thinkers in the realms of geology, paleontology and cosmology think in terms of millions or billions of years. Geologic epochs, cosmological history, that is child play for the Council, which is a different concept of time, more concerned with deep time, millions of years at a stretch. As such, their infrastructure is designed for that. And so, yes, a lot of the trans-medium objects and impossible accelerations that you've heard about are just their hardware doing its job. Maintenance, observation, sampling, nothing heroic. The warp bubble, or the Alcubierre effect, was probably mastered by them before our solar system even existed. It's old tech for them. It's kind of like the wheel is for us. Also, no, we are not the center of anyone's universe. There are about 1 billion planets in our galaxy that have more or less systems like Earth. Some just have microbes. Some have more complex life. A smaller subset of those have once had civilizations or still have them. We're just one more entry, a fairly recent one in cosmological terms, in a very large survey. Once early humans started doing interesting things, we moved from planet with life to planet with potential. They have watched this same story unfold in slightly different ways around 1,000 times from what I understand. Chemistry leads to biology. Biology creates technology. Tool use, language, agriculture, cities, industry, energy, space travel. Somewhere in there you always hit the same fork. Either the species figures out how not to blow itself to pieces with the energy densities it has increasingly had access to, such as nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, antimatter, or more exotic matter energy, or it wipes itself out. Our situation worried them. We are a little paradox. We're extremely good at cooperation and extremely good at organized violence. Our aggression stood out. Cooperation plus violence isn't unique, but we're very, very good at both. And once you get to things like nuclear power, that combo tends to end very badly. They'd seen plenty of variations of that play out over the last few billion years. About 10,000 years ago, our trajectory towards that became clear, and there was a major argument inside the council about what, if anything, to do with us. One side said the odds favoured self-destruction once we discovered and weaponized atomic-level technologies. The other side argued we were worth saving, or at least worth understanding better. The compromise was an experiment, one which has ramifications as to why all of this has been hidden for so long. Roughly 65,000 humans were removed from Earth and relocated to what is basically a preserve on a planet around a star you know as 82 Eridani. Internally, we called those people Erids. That star is in our catalogues if you feel like looking it up, but the details of the target planet are not public for obvious reasons. The Erids were started in a kind of controlled paradise. Their world has large dispenser systems that can produce whatever basic material they need to have. Food, clothing, tools, building materials, entire structures for habitation. Think Star Trek replicators scaled up and wired into the environment. In that setup, nobody starves, nobody is homeless in the way we understand it, nobody spends their life chasing money just to meet their needs. This was just the Erid's natural reality. The point from the Council's view was to remove material scarcity from the equation and see what humans do and achieve when they're not spending most of their energy bashing each other over the head over resources. Meanwhile, the rest of us stayed here on the control planet, dealing with scarcity, ownership, money, hoarding, and the rise of socio-political systems based on scarcity, all the things that define Earth civilization. The result, according to what we were briefed, is that the Erids are now about 5,000 years ahead of us technologically, averaged out. Same species, same basic biology, same starting point, completely different trajectory because of conditions. Nature versus nurture on a cosmic scale. For most of their history, the Erids thought they were native to that world. They only found out the truth roughly a century ago in our time. They learned that they were uplifted, that their ancestors were taken from Earth, that they have cousins here. And once they knew that, some of them started coming back to visit the original branch. This is where their history intersects with some of the UFO stories you know. The aliens that look almost human are just that. Human. They're not hybrids, not clones, not secretly angels or demons. They are Erids, born around another star, showing up here after being given a 10,000-year head start. They have, in some cases, met with the leaders of certain countries, and at least 2 United Nations Secretary Generals, both deceased. Now we get to why this has been buried for some 80 years. You have to think like a senior US official in the 1940s and the 1950s. World War II has just ended. The Cold War is starting, and everything is viewed through capitalism versus communism. Then someone puts a briefing in front of you that says, in essence, there is a group of humans living on another world who have no money, no private ownership in a way we structure it, automatic systems that meet their basic needs, and in that environment they advanced thousands of years faster than we have. The men who built what we now call the legacy program in the United States, that sounded less like interesting anthropological data and more like a walking, talking advertisement for space communism. It looked like proof that communism works better than the system they were trying to defend. That, and the ramifications of what could happen if that ever got out, terrified them more than the existence of aliens did. Though to be fair, they plenty had their worldview rocked by the latter too. So the core of the cover-up has never just been aliens or even their technologies. It has been the systematic implications. The idea that scarcity and ownership are not hard-coded into reality, that they are one possible way to run a society and maybe not the optimal one. That was seen as an existential political threat in the 1940s and the 1950s, and some people who grew up in that mindset are still steering parts of the program today. Now add in the famous crash retrieval incidents like Roswell in 47 or Kecksburg in 65, a handful of other retrievals around the US and around the world. What we are told is that most of those were not accidents, they were tests and gifts. The Council, with Erid input, allowed certain craft and systems to fall into human hands in a controlled way. Enough intact technology that a very motivated and capable society could learn from it, and not enough that it would instantly rewrite everything. In fact, the Kecksburg landing, it wasn't called a crash internally, was a direct result of a meeting and a gift agreement made at Holloman Air Force Base the year prior. The idea was to see who did what with it, who could figure it out, who kept it secret, who tried to share, who tried to weaponize it, who panicked. Based on those results, the plan was to pick one primary human partner to act as the main interface for full council contact, and to begin a managed process of reunifying Earth humans with the Erids and introducing us to the wider community. You can argue whether that is a good way to do it. I'm just telling you that is the framework I saw laid out. In the 1980s to the 1990s, during a brief period when the Cold War ended, there was a push to finally disclose much of this. This was initially proposed at a meeting between then US President Ronald Reagan and then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev at a summit in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986. Also discussed was getting rid of nuclear weapons, as had been urged by the Council. In the end, it was decided to wait. There were two more US pushes for disclosure between then and the 2017 New York Times article. One during the Clinton administration and another during the transition between the Obama and the first Trump presidency. Now for that part, that put a clock on all this stuff you've been hearing about. 2027 has been mentioned. What is happening in 2027? About 3 years ago, a species that is hostile to the Council found out about this Earth project. They're not part of the collective, and they resent the way the Council handles younger civilizations, as they themselves felt victimized by the Council. They also resent the credit the Council gets for successful cases. I have heard them described as jealous neighbors who would rather break your toys than watch you win. Yes, we sometimes joke about this stuff because, again, it's the only way to stay sane with this everyday knowledge and integrate it into your civilian life of Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas shopping, taking the kids to soccer practice, etc. And just as an aside, even consider how two of the biggest holidays of the year involve gluttony, Thanksgiving, and overconsumption, Black Friday. When you have the knowledge many have within the program, stuff that is taken for granted seems really weird and a symptom of the now forced scarcity of our current system. Anyway, back to the aliens. The hostile group I mentioned decided to spoil the experiment. This species is ahead of us technologically, but far behind the Council. Though they also inhabit a relatively nearby star cosmologically speaking, their travel is slower, less elegant, and has to take place in stages. Think of it as space island hopping, which is why the lead time is so long. You probably want to know what they look like. Physically, based on the descriptions we saw, they are about 5 feet tall, segmented bodies, multiple limbs, and basically ant-like in overall form. Nothing subtle or humanoid about them. They launched an expedition towards Earth with the stated goal of making a mess, cause chaos here, damage the experiment, and embarrass the Council by showing they cannot protect their own projects due to internal disagreements. Basically exploiting internal fissures, turning small cracks of understanding in the Council into canyons, thus destroying it. That's the hope, at least. The transit time means for us they are expected to arrive in roughly 2 years from now. That's the 2027 holiday present no one asked for. That news triggered a major debate within the Council. One group said the rules say non-interference. We watch and record what happens, even if it is ugly, as we've done in the past. The other group said, we effectively created this situation by tagging and monitoring this world. We have a moral obligation not to just watch a civilization we have been studying get smashed by somebody else's grudge. If the Council showed up in force, it would not be much of a fight. Their technology, relative to the ant species, is like a modern carrier group versus skilled archers on sailboats. The whole thing would be over very quickly, and it would also completely blow the point of letting a young species find its own way. It would also be a tremendous blow to the human ego, which the Council is well aware of. So they arrived at a compromise. No direct Council fleets defending Earth, no obvious intervention. Instead, they would quietly arm us. What they chose to give us are things they roughly call scalar phase weapons. Our vocabulary is not great here. They're not just high-powered lasers. They interact with fields we do not fully understand or really have names for yet. Shift phases. You dump huge amounts of energy from the vacuum into very specific volumes of space-time without a conventional bright beam or explosion. Compared to our current directed energy weapons, they are an enormous leap. As someone who spent years working with lasers and optic systems, I can tell you they sit so far off our current tech tree that if you saw the damage assessments from a pulse without context, you would think they were misprints. But compared to Council weapons, they're Nerf guns, training wheels per se. Anyway, that decision set off another big argument, both among them and among us. The obvious concern was simple. Once the external threat is gone, what stops us from turning these things on each other the same way we took nuclear power and turned it into thousands of warheads aimed at our own cities? On the US side, there were some people saying exactly that, and some members of the Council argued that if we on Earth roll out scalar systems across arsenals, the first real test after the bugs are gone will likely be some crisis where two human governments start lighting each other up with technology they do not fully understand. The counter-argument, which won, was that species-level survival has to come first. If humanity gets wiped out by someone else's petty feud, then the entire debate is academic. Also, if humans fight this off themselves instead of watching the Council show up and save the day, they will meet the wider community as people who actually did something, not as rescued primitives. Human ego remains intact. And kill switch, if you will, has been built into the tech to disable it after the conflict, which the Council sees as winning. If we then decide to use these weapons against each other, they'll simply be disabled until we humans have learned enough to disable the kill switch, which could be thousands of years from now, for all I know. So against a lot of internal resistance, the Council has been quietly providing scalar-phased weapons, and several blocs have had these weapons, not just the United States. The list I saw included the United States, China, the European Union, and through specific channels, Russia and Brazil. Those systems are being integrated into space platforms, aircraft, and undersea assets. Testing is happening in remote places and high altitudes, often disguised as other things. Most of the people physically working on it think it is an advanced, homegrown black program. Only a very small circle in each capital sees the full context. I got to see pieces of that picture shortly before I was pushed into retirement, which is a polite way of saying I stopped being convenient. That is as specific as I'm willing to get. There is one more reason I'm writing this now after pondering it for a long time, and it is more personal than the 2-year clock. A friend of mine, someone I worked closely with inside the program, another EO specialist, had been talking quietly years ago about going to Congress. Not with everything. That would be just suicidal. Just enough to force a real closed-door hearing in the Senate, get the true nature of certain SAPs acknowledged on paper, make it harder to bury the whole subject under jokes and career threats. Over a year ago, I got word that they died. The official explanation had been vague and unsatisfying. Medical complications on a trip to a black site in the Indian Ocean. Those medical complications do not match what I know about their health. And then it became an accident at home, with no details anyone will put in writing. People who would normally be candid went very quiet very fast, and maybe it was just bad luck. People do die suddenly. But given the threats which are known about within certain IC sectors when one is associated with this subject, I don't know for sure. What I do know is that the last long conversation I had with them was about whether it was worth trying to talk to certain congressional staffers for a certain senator. After hearing news confirming publicly much of what I know to be true privately, I stopped telling myself I would wait and see how things played out. Life is short. So here we are. Some stranger on the internet telling you an unbelievable story you are free not to believe. With roughly 2 years on the clock and the current rate of leaks and whistleblowers and half-disclosures, it is very unlikely they can keep all of this under wraps until the first time something openly not from here appears in our sky or in orbit. At some point before that happens, at least one major government, maybe more, is going to go public in a controlled way. My guess would be China or the US, but it could be one of the others on that scalar weapons list. You'll likely get a very carefully worded announcement about unidentified aerial phenomenon, about contact with non-human intelligence, about new defensive technologies and unprecedented international cooperation. It'll be designed to manage panic and control the story. What you probably will not hear in the first round of briefings is the part about the Erids, the economic implications of their society's existence, or the billion other habitable planets, the undersea infrastructure that has been here longer than we have even had bones. You will not see anyone step up to a podium and say, oh, by the way, there's a branch of humanity that grew up without the idea of money and scarcity 10,000 years ago and advanced 5 millennia past us. That is why I'm dumping this here, where people can ignore it, laugh at it, or save it and see how it ages. Like I said, do not have to believe me. I'm not here to sell a book, go on podcasts, be on TV, or do UFO lectures. Treat this as fiction if that makes you more comfortable. What I'm really trying to do is to get you to think past the kiddie pool question. Are UFOs real, or are non-human intelligence good or evil? It's not the interesting part. The far more interesting questions are what happens to this planet once everyone knows we are being watched, that we have cousins around another star, that some of the basic assumptions we built our societies around were just one option, not a fundamental law of nature. If in a year or two you start hearing officials talk about our cousins among the stars, or civilizations far older than ours, and new non-kinetic systems, and shared planetary defense, remember this post and see how well it fits. Look, the bugs are coming either way. The council is not going to save us directly. They already handed out the tools, and they're watching to see what we do with them. The part that is still up to us is what kind of world we build if we get through it. Will we just go back to work and beat each other over the heads with really advanced sticks? Or do we achieve a more enlightened potential? That is all I have. Rhea. So that's it. That's the very long, sprawling narrative. It's part confession, part warning, part philosophy. And many people probably have found it haunting or even mesmerizing. It's very suspiciously well written. Now, I'm not going to treat this as a testimony. I'm going to treat this as a sort of cultural phenomenon. It's like almost a ghost story for our scientific age. But where did this type of stuff come from? I think when the United States Air Force began formal investigations into UFOs, the public imagination forged a new kind of folklore. Ghosts became craft, angels became extraterrestrials, portents became sensor returns, and Cold War culture also shaped this genre. with espionage and secrecy and nuclear anxiety. It provided a sort of narrative for hidden programs and high-stakes decisions, extraterrestrial threats and stuff from beyond. Nowadays, there is such distrust of governments that people are watching the UAP hearings as a mainstream news source, and places like the New York Times are running front-page stories on pilots encountering unknown aerial objects. So it makes people feel that there must be something more out there that is highly technical, and it's being somehow hidden from us. But as usual, there are the believers. These are people like me who are already convinced of the hidden extraterrestrial contact. And for me, this document is a sort of a confirmation bias in a story form. It's very satisfying, it's emotionally resonant, and it does align with very long-held suspicions. And then, of course, you'll have the skeptics, who are writers, scientists, researchers, who immediately sort of recognize the typical narrative tropes, the parallels between the Cold War, the mythology. They see it as polished science fiction, almost like a novel. Then there is a sort of a middle ground, people who express tremendous fears about the world at the moment. They're worried about global warming, resource scarcity, government secrecy, ecological collapse, and the people who desire a wiser civilization that could somehow intervene and sort out this mess that they see we've got ourselves into. I think also there's something in us that likes the idea of a cosmic parent figure. The idea that the council is an ancient, wise, orderly institution, something many people feel that it's lacking here on Earth. I think people like to hold a mirror up to us as humans and wonder, where would we be as a society without scarcity, without famine, without money, without geopolitics? When I was discussing the Disclosure documentary with my wife the other day, she immediately felt, well, all of this stuff about aliens is great, but what's it going to do about famine and the millions of people who won't have seen the documentary or won't know about alien disclosure? They're still going to be starving and dying in very impoverished communities. I think people like the sense that there is a looming threat because it's going to unify everyone. There was that very famous speech that Ronald Reagan gave that at the United Nations many years ago, where he said that there's nothing more unifying for humanity that would show that we're all the same, as if an alien species was threatening us. The idea of an ant-like hostile species plays the role of this external antagonist, and it's a device older than myth itself. It's been used throughout history, and it somehow creates this idea of unity and drama in the way that religion does. I think there is always, as well, when you read stories like this like the Lacerta thing, it's a seduction there of insider knowledge. It's lovely to feel that you've got access to something that's come from the intelligence community. It feels like leaked truth. You weren't supposed to know this. So you could say that this document just confirms people's concerns. It's somehow that the governments are hiding everything from us. It's a very American thing at the moment. There's that feeling the public cannot handle truth, institutions are incompetent or self-serving. These are the widespread beliefs. And I think it gives us a certain amount of pleasure to think that there could be an alternate humanity, and these erids represent who we could have been, a lost potential, a parallel utopia. I think that miracles become military assets and cosmic gifts become classified, which mirrors real historical patterns. It's been called the weaponization of wonder. Every once in a while, a myth, if this is what it is, like this, seems to echo with ancient myths that we all know about that have existed for thousands of years. And today, before the end of the podcast, I just wanted to compare this mysterious Rhea document with one of the oldest pieces of apocalyptic literature we possess, and it's the Book of Enoch. And I think, to me, and this is what's been bothering me all week are the similarities, and they're startling. But what is the Book of Enoch? If you don't remember my previous episode, it's a book that was written about the 1st century CE. It's an apocalyptic text attributed to somebody called Enoch, who was the great-grandfather of Noah. But it didn't make it into the canonical Bible, except in the Ethiopian tradition. But it heavily influenced Judaism, early Christianity, and later mystical traditions. And in the book, he describes things that you don't really find in any other book in the Bible, with the possible exception of the Book of Revelations. He talks about watchers, angelic beings that are overseeing the earth. He talks about forbidden knowledge passed to humanity, a cosmic hierarchy above the angels, judgments, councils, celestial law, and a universe full of surveillance, bureaucracy, and oversight. Doesn't that sound familiar? And it should, because in a way, the Rhea document is a 21st century creation dressed in this intelligence jargon, and it moves through the same symbolic corridors. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are beings assigned to monitor Earth. They're not gods, they are administrators, they're functionaries, they're sort of cosmic civil servants. It's an interstellar council whose role is to observe, survey, catalogue, and occasionally intervene. And both of these texts describe a hierarchy of non-human overseers and a set of rules governing contact and consequences for interference. And both portray these watchers as operating within a system, not as sort of omnipotent beings, but parts of a larger bureaucracy. Both texts share a powerful theme, that humans are somehow young, brilliant, and dangerous. In Enoch, humans misuse knowledge, they become violent, catastrophe follows, and there's a reset, the flood. In the Rhea document, Earth is seen as unstable, we're brilliant but self-destructive, our weapons exceed our maturity, and outside forces are debating how much to intervene. And it's almost the same thing. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers teach us the forbidden arts such as metallurgy, weapon making, astronomy, cosmetics and seduction, magical practices. And in the Rhea document, humanity is acquiring recovered technology, glimpses of advanced physics, dangerous energy systems, and partial truths we can't fully comprehend. In the Rhea document, there's a description of the Erids, of this sister species, related to us but more advanced, more peaceful, and somehow socially cohesive. This again echoes the Nephilim. The Nephilim and other hybrids are beings in the Book of Enoch. These were humans mixed with higher entities. They produced kind of giants or sages. And they are beings who are like us, but more. And these are parallel humanities that serve a purpose to show that they're mirrors to us, that they show us what we might fear we might become, or what we dream we could become. And then, of course, in the Book of Enoch, we have judgment, a cleansing, a reset. And it's exactly the same thing in the Rhea document, where we're going to be invaded by a rather unpleasant species that is going to try to destroy us. But in the process, we're going to be helped by the more benevolent council and somehow come out of that intact as a more advanced, more communicative species with full knowledge of our intergalactic heritage. But having said all of that, you might wonder, why was the Book of Enoch left out of the Bible? After all, it was in there with all the other books for so long, but suddenly not there. Therefore, it's not considered really as serious scripture. Well, it's probably because parts of the Book of Enoch contradict the Torah. I think its description of angels and demons and heavenly realms were probably considered to be too elaborate and speculative at the time, and the rabbis in those days thought it was encouraging the wrong kind of mystical obsession. So it was never preserved in Hebrew, only in Aramaic and later Greek. And so by the time the Jewish canon was solidifying in the 1st and 2nd century, Enoch was already sort of sliding into the margins. But, that shouldn't be used to downplay how important the Book of Enoch is, because early Christians loved it. But later Christians, I think, got a little bit nervous. The New Testament directly cites it in a letter of Jude. And within a few centuries, the church had changed its stance completely, and they rejected Enoch. I think they didn't like the idea of angels mating with humans. They didn't like cosmic rebel angels or interspecies offspring. I think they didn't want secret knowledge being taught to humanity. And they also felt that its details of heavenly architecture was forbidden knowledge. This was too close to Gnosticism, occult teachings, and pre-Christian mysticism. So it didn't fit in with the cleaner, more controlled story, narrative that the church wanted to present. Perhaps more worrying to Christianity is that Enoch contains a Son of Man figure, long before Christianity, who was a chosen, pre-existent heavenly savior. Now, this raised huge problems because the Christian church wanted people to think of only one person in that visage, and that would be Jesus. But one major exception exists, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It included the Book of Enoch in its biblical canon, and it's still there to this day. It's a complete version of Enoch, but it's called Giz. An early Christian tradition was very comfortable with Enoch, but the Ethiopian Christianity was never considered to be a weird extra. It's just part of their library. So Enoch was left out of the Bible, but most Bibles, we should say, not most Christian traditions. So you might be wondering, okay, if there was a deliberate effort to suppress Enoch, and was it too dangerous, and were they hiding something? Or was it just too slightly disappointing? I don't know. There's no historical evidence that there was an organized campaign where the church or synagogue leaders said, look, this reveals too much, we need to destroy it. What we do see is that it created an intellectual discomfort. There was a lot of regional inconsistency, and the simple fact that manuscripts do get lost over millennia, especially if no one is copying them regularly. And Enoch didn't get completely eradicated from history. It just didn't get copied very much. And basically, not being copied is the same as being deleted. That's the fact in history. And in Ethiopia, it was around in scattered fragments and in quotations. It's kind of a miracle that it even survived at all. So that's it. I mean, it's very similar that we're having discussions about recently revealed information from modern whistleblowers and thousands of years old books. Was it a uniquely evil book that told us the truths that would be coming out and nobody really wanted to know about the history of the humanity? Or was it just fiction? Was Rhea a real whistleblower? Is he really telling us the truth? Or is he just another internet novel writer who's trying to worry us and using all the modern tropes of fear and distrust to do that? I don't know. I think in a way, though, centuries later, we're running our fingers over pages like this or reading it on the internet, and we're thinking to ourselves, what have we lost in our society? And if there really is secret knowledge that's out there that is being withheld in the same way as the Book of Enoch, if you like, may have been withheld because of its secret knowledge, it's right that at last we may be getting some disclosure and finding out about our true human heritage. Now, again, I'm not saying that the Book of Rhea is real. It resonates with me. It's been something, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, that's been in my mind all week. I've been dreaming about it. I've been thinking about it. All the coincidences have been hitting me. It had the same effect on me as the Lacerta files. And for that reason, I think it's definitely worth this podcast, and it's worth you thinking about things. Naturally, I hope it doesn't happen in 2027. I hope we're not invaded by a race of intergalactic insects. So thank you very much, and speak to you soon.